Well, it's interesting. If he came in and told me the nuclear codes, right, and said I'm about to take out New York City, well then, yeah, I would probably lose my license to practice law if I turned him in. My name is Doug Ridley, and I'm a criminal defense attorney. It's an interesting time right now to be dealing with documents and stealing documents, or having documents that you're not supposed to have, or having suitcases in the corner with documents that you're not supposed to have. Ethan Hunt gets in a ton of trouble if he is arrested and prosecuted for stealing that knock list. Now, obviously, my defense of Ethan is going to be that he was protecting it, that he wasn't stealing it, he was moving it to a safer location. And that is really his intention. He's not taking it, stealing it for his own uses or stealing it for nefarious uses. He's really trying to protect it. All of the things that he does to get in is breaking and entering, it's burglary, it's all of the really cool heist stuff that happens. Absolutely is 100% illegal. There's no question that he would be prosecuted for the breaking and entering and all of those things. But I like the argument that he was just doing it to protect the list. So I would be happy to make that argument on his defense. Interestingly enough, there are rules in place that allow law enforcement officials to use what they call a ruse in interrogation. And even though we see all of these masks and all of these elaborate sets, I mean, that's a level that's way above and beyond what we would typically see. It's not uncommon for law enforcement to use a ruse like, hey, the guy in the other room just gave us a full confession and pointed the finger at you the whole way. Yes, that is not an accurate statement, but case law and our rules in the criminal justice system allow law enforcement to make those decisions and to act in that way. It's a little distasteful, and juries tend to not like it very much, but there's nothing that automatically gets those cases kicked out of court just because a law enforcement officer used a ruse in their investigation. Take that basic rule and apply that towards what we see in Mission Impossible. Using the ruse of a mask or using the ruse of a set, I think that if I'm trying to protect those convictions as a prosecutor, I'm going to be arguing that that is no different than me saying, hey, we have you on video doing everything, so it's a really good idea for you to tell us the truth now. It's not that much of a different sort of a situation.
Collaborate with him. And it's Christmas.
The lawyer-client privilege is sacred. So anything that Ethan tells me, or tells his priest, or tells his therapist, those are the three, or his doctor, those are the areas that confidentiality and privilege are just deemed to be absolute.
What was in the file?
Russian nuclear launch codes.
Well, it's interesting. If he came in and told me the nuclear codes, right, and said I'm about to take out New York City, well then, yeah, I would probably lose my license to practice law if I turned him in. I have to weigh at that point the ethics of, is my license to practice law worth, a million lives? If somebody tells me that they're going to go rob a liquor store, then of course I have to keep that confidential. But there is a moral issue that can come into play. But the ethics of it, the ethics of whether lawyers have to keep those conversations confidential, is black and white. It's not that complicated at all. We have to keep those conversations confidential. So I would have to keep all of Ethan's secrets no matter what. The best example of this is looking at law enforcement. Law enforcement has immunity for what they do in the guise of their official duties as law enforcement. If they are going through and concluding an investigation, if they're doing what we would typically expect law enforcement to do, then what happens as a result of that, they have immunity for. But they're also required to obey a set of rules and a set of laws. And that doesn't change necessarily because you're an agent versus your local law enforcement. They have to follow a set of rules. They're not allowed to go and kill people or commit terrible crimes or anything along those lines. What we do see Ethan do, yeah, he lies, yeah, he wears masks, yeah, he deceives people, he absolutely kills people. But if it's in the realm of working that mission, they do have a license to carry out a lot of that. Some of the stuff that he does is really problematic, and I have to believe that there are some checks and balances that I guess we don't really get to know all about, just being regular civilians that we are. But I do think that Ethan is going to be called to the carpet for violating a lot of the procedures that he's supposed to follow. But I don't see that ever coming into court for us ever. I think that would stay pretty quiet. I think anything that is destroyed by the government, you can file a claim and you can get reimbursement for. So when he takes out a parking garage, if my car is parked in there, you can bet that Monday morning I'm going to go in and I'm going to file a claim and I'm going to make the government pay for my car. And if their defense on that is that, well, it was caused by a disavowed agent, that's not going to carry any weight. They're going to be responsible for paying for me. I'm going to make them pay for my parking garage, for my car, for whatever it is that they cause damage for. At the end of the day, the government is responsible for their agents and for their employees. And what their employees do to cause another civilian damage, they're responsible to pay for. There isn't a specific punishment for faking your own death, but I think that the steps that lead up to it could potentially have some sort of punishment. If you're forging government documents, if you are lying to law enforcement, if you are lying to government personnel, those sorts of things potentially have some level of criminal culpability involved with it. But just the general aspect of faking your own death, if you can avoid those other potential procedural, logistic pitfalls, there's not a specific crime related to faking your own death, not at least that Ethan would be subject to. And certainly, I mean, Ethan, I think he's going to be faking his own death a lot more times. I don't know how many times he's going to be successful in even accomplishing something like that.
I'm afraid today is the day when the IMF's luck runs out.
When we're looking at the IMF and assuming that it's closest to CIA, Ethan Hunt knows way too much for that agency to allow him to take the stand, go public, and deal with the cases that way. We obviously don't know a whole lot about how the CIA might resolve cases with rogue agents, because we don't hear a whole lot about that, which makes me believe we probably wouldn't hear a whole lot about that. I have a feeling that basically what we would be looking at is Ethan getting, like he does all the way through, getting disavowed, getting bumped down, and potentially being held liable, maybe in another country where they wouldn't have the right to publicize his trial and maybe wouldn't have the right to him giving a speech on the courthouse steps and sharing everything he knows. There are probably some countries that the IMF is affiliated with that would do them a favor of taking him into custody there. I have a feeling that that's probably the way that story would end.